and I think how I ended up there was that I learned that it's actually more than, the squishy stuff that you see on TV, but it really does tend to be strategic and fact-based. But then I take a step back and I look at how I ended up in finance, and it was kind of the same thing where I knew I was good with numbers and writing, and it made sense for me to be in business. My dad was in finance, and so I ended up there. And I think it was a really great foundation to my experience for the experiences I kind of grew in my career. But I realized that I wasn't being fulfilled in a way that I wanted to be. And when you look at some of my experiences, I started off at Northern Trust. I had a pretty typical career path. I started off in accounting. I went into like an internal audit role, and I think that's where I started to get my itch for strategy and kind of consulting rotational type roles before moving on to going on to Raytheon to do some finance roles before going back to business school. So if you go to the next slide.
Okay, let's see, Daphne here. How's that?
Yeah, that's good, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for your help with the slides. I had some technical difficulties. So when we go, so I decided to go back to business school because even though I love the data and analytics of finance, I knew I wasn't really being fulfilled, as I mentioned, and I wanted something more strategic, but I really wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And coming out of Kellogg, I graduated at a time where, it was 2008, we were having a financial crisis. And so even though I went back to do a functional change, I didn't end up doing a functional change, but I did do an industry change, which was really exciting for me. I landed at Pepsi. I was at Pepsi for almost 11 years. And I ended up in this role. I ended up getting this role at Pepsi that was really heavy accounting. It was supporting our supply chain organization. And it was one of those roles that was tough, and it was a really good learning experience, but it was one of those roles that I think I couldn't get out of fast enough, and ended up moving into a role in sales finance where it was kind of managing the other side of the P&L. So it was, instead of looking at your cost of goods and how you can optimize your manufacturing process, now I was working to support a sales team and really trying to figure out how to drive revenue for the sales team. And so two really tough, difficult roles that I really wouldn't have necessarily put myself in. But when I look back at it, I think it was really great foundational experience because I learned a lot about the organization. I knew how to manage a P&L from top to bottom. I had worked across a couple of different brands, and it gave me some experience in things that I hadn't really had experience in. And it helped me to then transition into different roles in the organization because I had really learned the business. And I had done it. I kind of applied that MBA spin to it and added a layer of strategy that really helped set me up for future opportunities. So even on the supply chain, I didn't love it, but I found some great ways to help drive efficiencies. On the sales side, I was able to help sell in some innovation into channels that we hadn't necessarily had it because I was able to give that strategic lens to it. So it was really great experience for me to get, but it was one of those things where I couldn't go into another finance role. And so after that, I started looking at what I wanted. I knew what I wanted to do long term, but I didn't necessarily know what steps to get there. And so I started networking. And what I saw was, if I look at a lot of these general managers in the building, which I knew that's what I wanted to do, I wanted to run a brand. They had a few different paths. And where it kind of narrowed in Pepsi, at least, was it narrowed down to sales or it narrowed down to marketing. And so I started networking with people in the building and, having conversations about how to make cross-functional changes at Pepsi. And even though it was interesting dichotomy, because most of our senior leaders in the organization had this great breadth of experience, cross-functional experience, but Pepsi now was so lean, it had gone through so many rounds of layoffs, it was a really lean organization. And so there really weren't opportunities for you to switch functions. They didn't make that very easy. So you really did have to sell yourself. Mm-hmm. And so as I was starting to network, I was in that sales finance role, there was an opportunity that came up first that was in sales, and how I got that was the person that was running, that had the role opening, I supported her channel from a finance perspective. And so I started talking to her about it, and it was an easier sell because, I knew how to run a P&L. I knew how to drive revenue. I knew the channel, I knew the business, I knew the Gatorade business. And really it came down to now she just needed to teach me how to sell. So it was really the first opportunity I had where I was trying to sell transferable skills, and make them see that vision. And so I went into this role, and I was in that role for probably 3.5 years. And it was one of those roles I was a really, really tough boss, and so it was a role that I probably came home a few nights in some tears, crying about just the frustration I had about, sitting in this role for so long. But it was one of those transformative roles where I got a lot of really good experience because I was managing a channel that had three really big customers for the brand. But it only had three customers, so it didn't have a lot of different support. So I was able to really get my first taste of marketing as well as sales in this role. And so I got to manage separate marketing for the channel. I got to take our big strategic brand plans for the year and then customize that into channel strategy, draft it off of that marketing agenda. I got to develop and sell in innovation into channels. I actually got to go out into the field and, with the field team and sell in some of that innovation. That's what they pulled us in for, which was, really interesting to hear people's perspectives, but to get that, I think you need to get that experience so that you know what the sales team is going through. And so it was one of those roles that was challenging. I learned a lot. I took on some stretch role opportunities even within that role of running like an insights project. But as I thought about my long-term path, it was one of those things where I knew this had to be my last. I'm going to stay in this role for a while to get all the sales experience I can get, because this is probably one of the last sales roles I'm going to get. And I knew I needed to focus on marketing. And so it was another chance, another time where I had to take a look back and think about the long term and consider some trade-offs. And so I started marketing myself for a marketing role. And it was another situation where I had networked, I'd worked with, an opportunity had become available with a marketing director who I had worked with in the past. She used to be on the Gatorade business. We had launched Propel electrolyte water. She had moved over to the Quaker business. And I had talked to her about, would you be open to, someone coming into a marketing role that doesn't have traditional marketing experience? And she was, shocked. She was like, I had never really thought you had interest in that, and she's like, let's talk about it. And so as we talked about it, it was an opportunity to manage a brand, like a smaller brand on the Quaker business. It was another thing where I had the finance experience, so I knew how to run P&Ls. I now had the sales experience, so I knew how to get out there with the field. I knew how to do channel strategy, and then it was just really learning the marketing piece. And so I had networked my way into that. But with that, it was, as you can see on my my visual here, I had to take a step back in title. And so that was it was a moment in my career where I was trying to figure out, do I continue down this path of, upward growth in my career, or do I take a title back? I mean, you're never going to let them mess with your money, but do you take a title back so that you can get this experience, which is going to be important for the long run? And I ended up taking the title back to move into marketing because I knew that's where my interest was. It had strategy. I was able to use all the cross-functional skills that I had developed, since I'd been at Pepsi, and really drive growth for that business. And so ever since I've been in marketing ever since. I started out at that brand manager role where I managed the business, and then I moved over into innovation, and I launched, almost 20 products for Pepsi. And then I moved into like a creative strategy and communication role, which is kind of more what you would think about traditional marketers doing. So, we ran ad campaigns. We were responsible for, providing creating the ecosystem, the advertising ecosystem for any new products that we're launching. And so it was a really great experience. Glad I was able to get it. But it did get to a point where I had now done all of this and I was looking for something different. And that's when I ended up making the move to AbbVie. And that was another one, and I don't know if Tony's joined yet, but that was another one where I wasn't ready, and then I was ready. I'd been really trying to get a lot of experience with Pepsi, but I knew when it was time to go, it was time to go, because I was at a point where I wasn't learning as much. I wasn't being challenged as much. I had touched all the brands. I had touched most of the functions, and it was time to go. And I was networking with a mentor of mine. He had told me about AbbVie. He said, you have the opportunity to, kind of help shape the culture because it's a newer organization. If you get on the right brand, you could like leverage that innovation experience to, help drive a new brand. You'd have work-life balance, and that was something that I was looking for at that time in my life. And so from there, I ended up moving on to AbbVie, and I've been there for about a year and a half. I joined 2 months before we launched a new brand. It's called Skyrizi, and it's been in the market we celebrated our year anniversary maybe like a month or so ago. And it's been really exciting because I've been able to take the experience I had in the past of innovation and really use it to not only support a new brand being launched, but also bring some of my traditional experience and some of the experience I've had at Pepsi into the AbbVie organization and think innovatively about how you can, build processes to help you become more efficient. So that's a little bit of my career path. If we go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so this is just kind of a summary of, I call it kind of skill sets developed, over my career path. I think about it in 6 buckets, and I'll kind of top line these, and then we'll go into a couple of them. I have a couple of examples. One is around innovator. I think that's one thing that I'm most proud of, and I've kind of like branded myself as. So not only do I have experience in launching a number of products, from ideation through campaign execution, but I've really carried that through as a creative problem solver. And I think that's kind of that's really one of my hip pocket skills. Brand builder. So I've managed new brands. I've managed small brands, niche brands, large brands, turnaround brands, all leveraging my cross-functional experience. And I think because I had that experience in, touching a bunch of different functions, it really helped me to have important conversations with, those functions to help really get things done and drive growth for the business. This next one is mean with the numbers. And that's just, kind of a nod to my finance experience. Like I'm so glad that that's where my foundation came from, because having that broad experience in P&L management has allowed me to really open up some opportunities and drive net revenue and drive, actually profit, drive cost efficiencies and revenue for brands. Strategic visionary. I think I talked about it in the beginning. I just have a passion for strategy, and I think even as we work on projects at AbbVie, I always try to go back to, okay, well, this is our goal. This is our goal with this is our strategy. Are we laddering back up to that? And I've had the opportunity to set that strategic agenda across multiple brands. Selling to win. I've developed some critical selling and negotiation skills that I use every day. And then this last one is around just talent recruitment and developing. That's just a passion point of mine at Pepsi, and I'm starting to get involved a little bit now at AbbVie. But at Pepsi, I was really involved in like leading the strategic vision for how we recruit talent into the organization from an MBA perspective, with a specialized focus on diversity. And then I've been able to get involved in that a little bit at AbbVie too. So if we go to the next slide. Today we'll focus on, and I touched on these, but we'll focus on just the innovation, brand building, and strategy buckets. So if we go to the next slide. I thought the best way to do this, and Dr. Karen, you can tell me if this makes sense, was to do a little bit of storytelling around a couple of different products I had some experience launching. So, building your brand, it's like the tale of 2 different launches. So when you think about innovation, companies leverage innovation for many reasons. They use it to capture new buyers, to stabilize share loss, to drive news, to increase shelf placement. Innovation in brand building, it really comes in many forms. And so I thought I would tell a couple of different stories about how we used innovation to drive growth for Quaker. So if we start on the left-hand side with Quaker Kids Organic, anyone that has some familiarity with the brand knows that our Quaker Chewy business, bar business, is one of our bigger businesses. So behind oatmeal, Quaker Chewy bars are the second biggest business. But as people were becoming more mobile, on the go. They're more busy, and they're looking for healthy. They're really looking for healthy and portable options, with this focus on health and nutrition. And so with this, we noticed that, people are moving into like this bars category, and the category is expanding. It's exploding, actually, the snack bar category, but the Chewy business wasn't seeing the same level of growth. So we were starting to lose share in that business. And so we had to really dig in to understand the trends that were driving us that were, causing the loss, the share loss. Did we lose space? Are we turning at a slower clip? Like, is it a certain retailer that's causing it? And then we went to dug even deeper to understand what was going on with our demographic. And so when we looked at it, one of our core demographics was, they're looking for reasonably healthy snacks, but that were still pretty inexpensive. Excuse me. And they were still buying it. Like, that core demographic was still buying it because they really like the value proposition. Quaker Chewy was usually on sale. They could get it. It's pretty healthy, so no issues there. But then when we looked at our desired demographic, which we called the nutrition engaged consumer, which was like, think about our millennial mom. She's on the go. She's running her kids from soccer to basketball, and so she's looking for these healthier alternatives to be able to grab for her kids, but she has a higher expectation of what she's looking for when it comes to, what she feeds her children. And the issue there was that we weren't capturing that market, because they looked at Chewy and they had this kind of a negative perception of how healthy it was. They just didn't see it as a healthy product because it didn't have some of those monikers like organic, non-GMO, no artificial flavors, colors, and ingredients. And so, we knew we had a couple of different issues we needed to tackle. One was, for the Chewy business, we need to reformulate to make that healthier so we don't lose our demographic. But then we also had an opportunity in the premium space where we needed to go after and really capture this consumer. And so what we ended up doing was we leveraged an insight. So the insight was, we're looking at this mom whose mindset is health and nutrition is a core value of mine that I really want to pass on to my children. It's important for me to teach them to make these good choices, but it can be really difficult when there aren't a lot of options that my kids will grab for. We can put it in the cabinet, but are they actually going to eat it? So how do you balance that? And the barrier that we had to overcome was this belief that Quaker doesn't make products that meets the nutritional standards they're looking for for their family, because it doesn't have, some of the monikers that you're looking for. So they needed to balance healthy and delicious. And so we designed this portfolio centered around this demographic. And the next step was to figure out how to market this product. So we've got a great product. It's organic, it's non-GMO, it's got not a lot of ingredients in it. It's got real fruit pieces in it, no artificial flavors and ingredients. It's got everything, 100% whole grains. So now that we've got something that tastes great and will meet, that demographic's needs, how do we then begin to market it to get it ready for launch? And so the first thing we looked at was, we've got a good product. Now let's look at the packaging of the product. We looked at the design. How do we want to design this so that we can quickly communicate, our message to this consumer? And so one of the things we wanted to communicate were, we wanted it clean. So we leveraged the white packaging. You can see it to the left. We wanted to build trust with that consumer. And so Quaker has a lot of trust. We actually did a lot of testing on, do we make the logo really small so it doesn't have the Chewy halo, or do we make it really, big? And what we determined was, that Quaker logo is really important because it communicates trust, and it's something that people are familiar with. We wanted it nutritious, and so we used fruit to develop it. And then we highlighted that in our packaging. And then you can't really see it, but in the upper right-hand side, that blue bar that has, we call it a claims ribbon. And so that's where it's communicating, 100% whole grains, no artificials, everything that's important for you to see. And then we highlighted organic on it. So we wanted to make sure that when you look at that packaging, you pick up that it's kids, that it's clean, it's organic, and it's got no nasties. Our GM used to say no nasties in it, and communicate that quickly. So that was our first step. The second step was determining the optimal price point. And so it always gets, kind of fun when you start to like dice the market and understand what the competitive set looks like. And okay, well, the competitive set is priced at this, but do they have the same, value proposition that we have? We've got a really premium, delicious product, do they have everything that we have? And, and so you have to make sure that you're pricing it at a price point that's competitive, but is allowing you to optimize, capture as much profit as possible. Next, we looked at place. And so, you talk to sales team, you work hard with the sales team, not only on pricing, but also placement. So what do they need to get their customers excited? We looked at couponing, we looked at in-store promotions, we looked at partnerships, anything that we could provide that wouldn't fully dilute our margin, but allowed us to get optimal placement on shelf, because, you want to be at eye level so that it catches someone's eyes, because we want to be there at that point of purchase when they're ready to make that decision. And then promotion, we did a lot of research on what does this millennial do? Where do they go? Because we want to meet them where they are. And so we created an entire ecosystem, really focused on leading with our digital strategy. So kind of a mobile, they're on their phones a lot. So we want it to be optimized for getting this on their phones. We know that they use social media. So we want to make sure that we have, a very strong, a very strong social strategy. We want to make sure that if they're looking up, an article on the Skim, or, they're on Allure or something like that, that we push banners out to them so that they're seeing our message repeatedly. And, when you look at the creative message and when you look at the creative, like the advertising, it really leans into our packaging so that it creates that quick recall for them, so you're in the places they're at, and then you're creating that really quick recall with simple messaging and simple branding. And then what else? Let's see here. Oh yeah, we also did a couple of different things that were unique, where we really dialed into influencers, and then we looked at partnerships. So we worked with nutritionists, we worked with healthcare professionals to try to get some of that message of healthy snacks into their offices and into their newsletters. And then we also did some sampling in locations where kids would get snacks. So we did something with Parachute where they were going to these class pass. It's like a class pass for kids, where kids would go to these fitness exercise classes or whatever, and they get a snack at the end of the day. So they get a snack, we pass out the snack, and then they get a coupon on their way out so they could eat it and then say, Mom, this is delicious, now here's a coupon. So we're really trying to meet them anywhere we could meet them. So that is Quaker Kids Organics. Just going back to the problem we were trying to solve. We were trying to capture and grow share by expanding our consumer demographic to capture premium snack buyers or moms that we had lost. And so with the launch of these 4 products, we were able to capture someone that we had lost, that we weren't getting, or we had lost, they had switched out, and grow the business. So that was one. That was kind of a bigger project. Now, on the right-hand side with Quaker peanut butter oatmeal platform, that was a different one. So that was just a new flavor launch that we were looking at. The insight was around, this growing nut butter trend that was happening a few years ago, and the desire to get in more protein. And so we had looked at this project every way, including sideways, and we could not figure out how to make the financials work on it. And so we were trying to kill this project quickly. I think we had created 5 presentations to take to leadership to try to get this project killed. And it came down to, it ended up kind of flipping from we should do this because this is the insight and it's a delicious product, to Walmart really wants this. And so what Walmart wants, Walmart's going to get. And so we were given the mandate of, not only do you need to make this because Walmart said so, but you need to make it, in that negative profit margin that you keep reporting to me is not going to cut it. So you need to figure it out. And so with this one, just taking a step back, the reason it was important was Walmart drives scale, and so we, you always want to keep Walmart happy because they drive scale for us. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And then the other piece of that was important was that we were also simultaneously trying to launch a premium oatmeal that Walmart wasn't all the way bought into. And so we were trying to use what they wanted to get us what we wanted, so that we could get incremental shelf space by, with this premium one, by giving them what they wanted with this nut butter one. And so we ended up, we needed to figure it out, and we needed to figure it out really quickly. And so we had to get innovative and just figure out how we could start to cut some of these costs. And we looked at, every line of the P&L. And we found two opportunities. One, which is kind of a smaller one, which is around reformulation. We were able to reformulate it, reducing the peanut powder, you know, and still give an optimized taste. So, you know, that was a shout out to R&D. We were like really working in the lab to give us something that consumers would like, but was cheaper. And then the other piece, which ended up being a bigger piece, was figuring out supply chain optimization. So figuring out, you know, like how we can, it started off as how can we negotiate down who's currently, you know, slotted to make this. And, you know, just taking a step back, it's kind of funny because the reason we had to go outside of our network was because a few years back, we had cleansed our network of all things that had allergens. And so we cleaned it of any kind of peanut product because we didn't want to have to put that, you know, this was made in a facility that contains peanuts. And so we cleaned everything out so that we didn't have to put that on our packaging. And so because of this, we now had to go to a repacker, and that repacker was expensive. And as much as we were trying to leverage our scale and really drive it down, they weren't getting it to a point. They got it better, but they weren't getting it to a point where we could have reasonable profit margins. And so we had to really go back and have multiple conversations with our supply chain committee about what opportunities there were. And we ended up like, you know, I call it grace of God. We ended up having this opportunity where we had a plant in our network that had a product that was being discontinued. And so they had some capacity. And so they were like, hey, you know, we can probably do it if you give us, you know, if you invest in us to be able to give us what we need to be able to create this product. And so we looked at it, and then we found at our main oatmeal plant, there was like a poucher that you needed to be able to pouch the product that had been decommissioned because it wasn't being used. And so if we invested in changing out that poucher and then had it shipped to this other plant, we'd all of a sudden be able to bring it in. And so, you know, through weeks of just exploration and partnering with supply chain and finance to figure it out, we were able to make the case to our supply chain committee to make this investment, to move it so that we could bring it in-house. And in doing so, not only did we have a 50-point flip in our profit for this, but it also opened up capacity for us to be able to produce additional product, oatmeal product on this line whenever we needed to, prior to going outside of our network. And so, of course, on the way out the door, I was like, we did that. We gave you guys that. So that counts. That's going to my PR. But, and so it was just a really fun opportunity. It was a hard project that we were working on, but I think because we got really innovative and creative in how we were thinking about how to solve it, we were able to unlock some really cool opportunities to drive efficiency. And with that, we were able to launch our 2 SKUs, peanut butter SKUs, to get, you know, Walmart happy, and it's still in the market. And then we were also able to get additional shelf space for our premium oatmeals. And so, you know, a couple of different examples and 2 different types of innovation, but, you know, it just kind of tells you the story of how a lot of that comes to life, and then, you know, how you think about innovation in a different way, because it's not just about launching new products, but it's how do you get creative in how you solve problems. Mm-hmm. So if we go to the next page.
Okay.
So how do you translate that into your career? I'm sure there's a few more buckets, but here's a few thoughts that I had. One is innovation is really about problem solving. So where do you see opportunities for improvement in your workplace? And then how can you uniquely solve that problem? I think that's how I try to approach a lot of things. You know, even coming to AbbVie and being on a new brand, one thing I love about AbbVie is that they give you a lot of time to really onboard and learn about the patient and the therapeutic area, and, you know, really go deep in the brand. But as they give you that time to do that, sometimes it's a little bit of a slower uptick in what you're able to do. And so what I tried to do was, not only as I was picking up that piece and picking up work, I was trying to think about what process efficiencies I was seeing, optimizations, you know, could be made, and how could I quickly add that value. So what challenges are we having, you know, with, you know, the amount of time we spend on meetings, or the way we brief and get creative, and, you know, just thinking about some opportunities for improvement so that you can quickly add value and solve some of those problems. The second one is looking for stretch opportunities in your career to add depth and breadth. So there's been a couple of times in my career where I've had to, take the title piece out of my head and really focus on the experiences. But I think because I've done that and because I've tried to get like well-rounded in my, in my experience, I've been able to use that in conversations and really push a lot of agendas forward that I was trying to push because I was knowledgeable about the process and the work that needed to be done. The third one is lean into what makes you uniquely you and sell it. So, take those hip pocket skills like problem solving, I think is one of mine, and really elevate it. Make that yours, make it ownable, and then don't forget to sell it so that people know, what you're known for. And the last one is building your personal brand requires thinking about your career from a long-term perspective and then really shaping your experiences around the stories you wish to tell. So, you think about in a few years, like what's the story I want to be able to tell about myself? I think as I was preparing for a couple of presentations, I was thinking about if we went back to that other slide, like over my career, what's the high level skill set I've developed, and then how do I want to translate that? And I think it's important, because I think that story is what's going to make you unique and make opportunities open up for you. And that was it.
Well, thank you, and joining us now. Well, Diane, I have a couple of students that are here. One is on the advisory committee in terms of academics, and she's a project manager. So pouring into her and basically showing her how to package yourself, because you talk about the product, you talk about the packaging, you talk about the design, and you talk about that level of communication and creating trust between customer. Within this aspect is an employee, right, and employer. So developing those things in terms of branding yourself is so important and is so critical. I have another young lady who's writing a grant for one of our missions in Negril, Jamaica. She's writing a grant for the first time, and so she's actually had to step into that role to actually see what's going on, to vet the situation, to look at all the research behind it. And it was a new role for her, and she had to do that to put this proposal together, first of all, for a grade, secondly but it was a very transformative process for her. So in terms of brand building, they can actually take these experiences and become that problem solver. That's one of the monikers that they could have. They're innovative in their roles, whether it's academically or as an employee as well. So one of the things I want to ask you is, in terms of organizational leadership, you talked a lot about the teams in the corporation, but in terms of organizational leadership and product innovation, how do those roles intersect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think I'm trying to think about how to answer that. I think about that in a couple of different ways. I think about team building and just like cross-functional leadership and project management. When I think about how Pepsi has transformed their structure over the years just to try to find the most optimal structure, it kind of ebbs and flows. I feel like you're always trying to figure out that the right structure. But I think where it comes down to is being able to work with your cross-functional partners and really understand where some of their challenges are. I think the reason I was able to make some things happen is because I could talk their language, and I spent time with them really trying to understand, why are you telling me no? Help me understand that. Like, I'm not trying to, be a jerk about it, but help me understand why you're telling me no so that we can then figure out how to solve that problem. And I think that was really how we got a lot of things done. And that's how we, were able to partner and get a lot of things done, was because we really tried to understand what the challenges were within their functional leadership, like what was causing that, and then figuring out creative ways to then tackle that challenge and then move on to the next thing. Does that answer your question?
Sure. Did you find that the organization was conducive to you asking the critical questions? Were they welcomed, or or was it a threat? Was it a perceived threat because you're young coming into the organization and you have the skills and abilities to, first of all, identify some of the issues that's going on, and you're
Mhm.
asking the questions, and you probably have the solution. So was the organization, the culture, did it embrace your critical thinking skills or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing I really enjoyed about Pepsi was that they it was the expectation that you challenged a lot of that stuff, you know. And but to that, I think it's all in how you do it, you know. So it's you do it in a way that's collaborative and not in a way that's necessarily threatening. You know, it's not, you know, it's helping you, you know, it's asking that question of why, like help me understand what the challenges are, you know, because maybe the problem is something different than what I think it is. And so I think it's all in how you position it. And, you know, I think one thing we always hear is like what's in it for me, what's in it for them, you know, what are they going to get out of it being able to do this. I remember going into a lot of my the meetings that I led to launch a lot of this innovation, like cheerleader number one. You know, I think I could think of one where we were trying to, I don't know, make some crazy things happen on Life Cereal. And I walked into every meeting because I knew they hated that project. And I walked into every meeting and was like, guys, I mean, are you ready to make the news? Like, we're about to do some big things. Like, if we can figure this out, we're going to be amazing. We're going to get big bonuses. Like, and you know, and I think it's just how you encourage your teams and make sure that you're always giving them the what's in it for them, so they don't feel like you're always just walking in with a bunch of asks.
Okay, very good, very good. Now, what threads ties organizational culture with finance in terms of your cross-functional skills?
Say more.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that question is because as I am doing the deep dive with our syllabus, there are some quantitative opportunities. I feel like that's missing in my program. And
Mm-hmm.
so having the ability to read that P&L and to create a narrative and articulate the narrative so that everyone can understand it. Uh, what are the threads in terms of organizational leadership? Because that's my thinking, because I come from an economic background. But
Mm-hmm.
if you were to look at that curriculum and you didn't see any quantitative courses,
Mm-hmm.
how would that impact those students if they don't have those skills?
Yeah, you know, I don't think everyone needs to be a finance expert, but I think everyone needs to have some basic understanding of how a P&L operates, you know, kind of the basics, because that's what your leadership is looking at. That's, you know, how you know what can actually drive profit in the organization. And when you understand and can start to pull some of those levers, that's what's going to add value, and that's what's going to help, you know, help you be successful, is when you can quantitatively say, I drove this percent of revenue, or, you know, I drove this percent of cost savings in the organization. I think it's important. It's actually a skill that we had to have at Pepsi. You know, we didn't necessarily have to, you know finance in detail, but we had to know the basics of how to like operate that stuff. And then at the end of the year, we actually had to not only qualitatively say what we did, but quantitatively say what we did. So how do we quantitatively impact the business?
Mhm.
And so it's important to understand that, at least from a high level.
Okay. Good, good. Were you concerned about, you have all the transferable skills, but were you concerned about the culture of ADV and how they would accept your skills coming on board?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I kind of grew up in Pepsi. I spent the bulk of my career in Pepsi, and their cultures are very different. You know, their cultures are very different, and people knew me. You know, people knew what I was doing, and so going into AbbVie, that's a new industry. You know, completely new industry. Most of the marketers are marketing a different way. They market to doctors, not necessarily patients, and so it was a little bit different of an exchange. You know, the team that I sit on is great because it's marketing to patients, consumers, which is, you know, the wheelhouse that I came from. But a lot of people in the organization don't have that experience, that they grew up in pharma. And so, you know, one of the things that I've been trying to do is still lean into the experience I have on the consumer side, because that's still decently unique in the base, you know, of marketing professionals there. but then try to learn, about the other aspects of it because it's different, and I think I'll probably have to spend time, understanding some of the other levers of marketing, the different stakeholders, that you may have to market to, as part of the learning process. But for what I'm doing now, it's pretty similar. It's pretty similar. It's just a different vertical.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'd like that. Are there additional questions? And it usually starts out very quiet and then the questions come on board. Kim,
Hi, it's Kim.
yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you shocked?
No.
So when we talk branding, I always find these every conversation is like so intriguing to me. But when you talk branding, we always talk in like the successful, like you shared your success stories, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're branding, when you're trying to market something new, is there any point at which you can say this is not going to be successful, and then do you rebrand it or do you walk away?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, in my innovation role specifically, we did that a lot, and you had to be comfortable with it because what you've got a couple of different types, right? You've got near an innovation where you're doing something that's like, call it a flavor change. We know how to make oatmeal in this way. We're just looking to change the flavor out, right? That's pretty easy. But then for some of the more complicated ones, I mean, we killed projects all the time. We wanted to do something with cherries that were sourced from, actually one of the projects, there were cherries that were sourced from the mountains in the Rocky Mountains only, small batch, and it got to a point where if it's not profitable or we don't think that we're going to be able to sell it in as much to get scale, you kill it, and so I think you have to be comfortable with putting in months of work and then being able to walk away from it because that's the right financial decision.
Mm-hmm. And then when you do have a successful brand, are there any other determinants of success outside of profitability?
Yeah, I mean, there's profit is a big one, but there have been some product launches that I've worked on that were really more strategic. So we knew it had a lower profit margin, but it helped us start to shape what Quaker meant as a brand. It started to help build the equity in a different way. And so, we would invest in stuff like that because, not only did it get us extra space, but it opened us up to a new demographic, and it helped us to start to shape the narrative of the brand as not just, kind of old fashioned Quaker, but we're innovative in the way that we think about health and nutrition, and it can drive, certain, so, there's kind of profit building, but then there's also equity. And I think you look at those a lot when you're marketing, and there's some strategic decisions that you will make that won't be super profitable, but you do it because you're trying to push the brand to another level.
Good questions. Anyone else? So Diana, how do you transfer your marketing skills when you're working with a for-profit organization to a nonprofit organization, whether it's the foundation or the church? How are those skills transferable?
Yeah, I think it's all transferable. You just deal with different budgets.
Oh, the budget.
You just deal with different budgets. But I think I think about some of the stuff that we're doing with the church now. A lot of that stuff is leaning on the knowledge that I've gained in my career and thinking about how we can reach people in a different way. So, one of the things that we looked at was expanding. We had the streaming service, but we expanded into Facebook, expanded into Facebook Live and doing a lot of content on Facebook because you can reach a bigger audience, and then thinking about how, you communicate your messaging as a nonprofit and making sure that's consistent and building that into, your day to day. And so I think you can always transfer marketing because it's really storytelling, and how do you want to communicate your story?
Good. Tell me a story. Anyone else? My goodness, it really is a quiet audience tonight. I'm shocked. Well, I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to stop by. And I have the PowerPoint slides. Do I have permission to send them to everyone
Sure.
on this channel? Okay, if everyone could just send me your email address. But one more thing I want to ask, because there's that work-life balance. And so for, what would you say, about 15 years, you worked on branding yourself, and you weren't afraid to sacrifice even some of your moves, and whether they were lateral moves, because you knew long term that that was going to help you brand yourself to be much more marketable, and to convey this message that I am multidisciplined, multi-talented. But was it difficult to make those sacrifices at first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always difficult, especially when you're on a pretty good career trajectory in one function, to then, have to think about the trade-off. And would I have preferred to not make the trade-off? Yes, but do I like look back and am I sad that I did it? No, because of the experience that I've gotten, and I have to think about it as a marathon, not a sprint. And so my objective is that, when I'm sitting in audiences with people, I'm like, well, not many people look like me, not many people have that experience. And so that helps me tell my story in a different way to leadership. And, in the long run, I think it'll put me in a better position than had I stayed in a function that I wasn't passionate about, I didn't love, but continued to grow. I think at some point I would have stopped because I didn't have that passion and interest in that field, and so I think you just got to play the long game with it. But yeah, it was a hard trade-off, and I think it was a hard trade-off, yes, but in the long run, I think, you always want to negotiate from a point of strength. And so, I kept that in mind. And so even though I had to title back for things, I never lost money. I always looked to get more money. I always looked to make sure that the experiences were what I needed to get, so if it meant, making sure, like the first role I did it, I wasn't supposed to have a direct report, but I was like, I need this experience. And if I'm going to give up my title, I need to be able to manage something. And I need to be able to get a really quick, rapid fire experience. So make sure that the brand that I want needs to give me a full, a well-rounded experience so that I can get back to where I was. And so, it's always going to be a trade-off. And I think there's things that you're not going to give on, but for me, that was one that ended up being worth it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. You remind me of Peter Senge Learning Organization, when he talks about the 5 disciplines, personal mastery with your education, talks about the shared vision. So you ran that marathon, and so you had that shared vision, and because of the collective, you were able to land a position at ADV. One of the other things is mental models. So you remove those barriers. And one of the things we think as directors that we should remove the barriers, but sometimes we don't know which barriers to remove. Yeah. And so, doing the deep dive and trying to figure out, what's good for the employees in terms of employee engagement. And there's been a lot of trauma that's going on with organizations now. So how do we affect change? But the other one that I heard in your presentation was team learning. So you yourself, you developed this repository of skills that you could use, transfer, and basically you were the master of your own destiny because of that fact. And you made the sacrifice, and that knowledge you can share as well. Last year, Deanna talked about the documentation and collecting the documentation. It really ties in terms of employees and your organization, but also personally as well. I think that is awesome. And then the 5th one is we're all a part of an integrated sum. So what are those factors that will lead us to excellent in success? Don Fiedler said that there's the X value and that it should yield the Y value, but then there's a W value that we are not considering as well. And so that's like exogenous to our plan and our trajectory. So we have to develop those plans strategically so that we can be successful and excellent in all we do. So Diana, I so appreciate you. Okay, team, if there are any more questions, now is the time to ask them. Okay, well done. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate these Friday night chats have been so exciting every week. And with your wealth of knowledge and experience, it just have increased the value of this platform. So thank you as well.
Thank you, Mom.
All right, take care. Oh,
thank you, Dr. K.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you. Next week, we are going to host Alton Reese, and he's going to talk about organizational leadership from a global perspective. Okay. All right. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.